The Pacific was endless that night. Cold, black, and silent. 5,000 meters below, the crushed remains of a Soviet nuclear submarine slept in darkness. Its hull was split open like a wound in the earth. Its missiles, 3 of them, each armed with megatons of destruction, were still down there, waiting. In a secure room thousands of miles away, American analysts stared at a flickering sonar map. Something massive had vanished under the sea, something the Soviet Union would never admit losing. A voice broke the silence. "If that's what we think it is, we might have just found a Soviet nuke." The room froze. Then another voice, quieter, colder. "What if we could bring it up?" That single question would ignite one of the most ambitious covert operations in CIA history, an underwater heist the world would not learn about for decades. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? If you love real spy missions that sound impossible, hit subscribe. Give this video a like, because this story, Project Azorian, is proof that in the world of espionage, even the ocean can keep secrets. The year was 1968, the height of the Cold War. Nuclear tension had become a rhythm the world lived by, each superpower listening, watching, guessing the other's next move. Beneath that surface struggle, silent submarines prowled through the deep, each one a potential spark for Armageddon. Far east of Kamchatka, the Soviet submarine K-129, a Golf II-class ballistic missile vessel, slipped quietly into the Pacific. 98 sailors were on board. Their mission, patrol the ocean with 3 nuclear-tipped missiles, always ready to strike if ordered. It was supposed to be a routine patrol. It was not. Weeks later, K-129 stopped reporting in. No coded messages. No routine position checks. The Soviet Pacific Fleet grew restless, then alarmed. Orders were shouted across command posts. Search planes roared into the sky. The northern seas filled with Soviet ships, combing an area larger than Western Europe. Nothing. Not a single trace. To the world, it was silence. But silence speaks loudly in the intelligence business. Across the ocean, the United States had been quietly listening. Deep under the water lay an enormous network of hydrophones, the SOSUS array, built to detect Soviet submarines. One listening station picked up something strange, a muffled explosion, a metallic groan, then silence. Analysts triangulated the signal. The coordinates pointed to an empty patch of sea, roughly 1/500 miles northwest of Hawaii. In that moment, American intelligence realized what the Soviets didn't want to believe. A Soviet submarine had imploded. For the US, this wasn't tragedy, it was opportunity. A lost nuclear sub meant nuclear warheads, code books, and possibly the Soviets' entire command and control system, sitting on the seafloor, waiting. But there was a problem no one could solve with a satellite or a spy plane. The wreck lay 5 kilometers below the surface, a depth no human or machine had ever recovered anything from. When the report reached Langley, a senior CIA officer looked up from the file and whispered, "The sea keeps its secrets, unless we take them." And that was the beginning of Project Azorian. Inside the Soviet command centers, panic gave way to shame. Moscow denied the loss publicly, telling the world nothing was wrong. Internally, it was chaos. Some believed an onboard explosion had triggered the sinking. Others suspected a collision with an American submarine. None could prove it. Families of the missing crew received letters wrapped in secrecy, thanking them for service to the motherland. But in Washington, curiosity turned into obsession. The CIA called in naval engineers, intelligence officers, and scientists. They gathered in windowless rooms to study sonar maps and classified photographs taken by deep-sea reconnaissance drones. Each picture showed the same haunting sight. The shattered hull of a massive submarine, its missile tubes partially exposed, lying on the ocean floor like a ghost. Someone asked the impossible question, can we lift it? The answer was almost immediate. No. The weight alone, over 2,000 tons, made it beyond the reach of any known technology. Still, the idea refused to die. The agency's best engineers proposed outlandish concepts: giant cranes suspended from ships, air balloons that could raise steel, robotic claws descending into the abyss. Most were laughed out of the room. But the discussion kept circling back to one truth. If they succeeded, the US could unlock the Soviets' nuclear codes, missile designs, and communication systems, an intelligence prize worth billions. The idea began to evolve from fantasy into design. Secret meetings multiplied. Budgets expanded quietly under unrelated departments. A new division inside the CIA started studying deep-sea mining technology. The public story would be simple: an oceanographic experiment. The real mission: recover the Soviet submarine K-129 from 16,000 feet below the surface. It would take years to plan, and it would have to remain invisible to the Soviets, to the public, even to most of the US government. A handful of men knew the truth. They called it Azorian. While the agency schemed, the wider world burned with unrest. The Vietnam War escalated. Protests shook Washington. American astronauts circled the Earth, while Soviet cosmonauts answered from orbit. Above, the two nations raced for the stars. Below, they prepared for nuclear war. In this tense atmosphere, secrecy wasn't just protection, it was survival. The US had intercepted fragments of Soviet naval chatter, confirming Moscow still had no idea where the K-129 rested. That ignorance was a rare advantage. Time, however, was the enemy. Saltwater corrosion would soon eat away the submarine's secrets. The CIA had to move fast. One internal memo summed it up in a single line: "What we seek will rot away, and with it, our chance to know how the enemy thinks." For the next 2 years, planning accelerated in total darkness. Meanwhile, on the Pacific seabed, K-129 slept untouched. Tiny fish swam through twisted steel. The silence down there was absolute, except for the occasional vibration of distant seismic activity. To the Soviets, it was a tomb. To the CIA, it was an open vault. Satellite imagery confirmed the site remained undisturbed. No Soviet ships patrolled nearby. The window for recovery was open, but closing fast. By mid-1970, the outlines of an audacious plan were complete. The US would build a vessel so large it could lift the submarine using a mechanical claw the size of a skyscraper. The claw would lower down through a hidden chamber inside the ship's hull, latch onto the submarine, and bring it to the surface, all while the ship appeared to be performing scientific work. It would be the most expensive covert operation in CIA history, costing billions of dollars and involving thousands of people, most of whom would never know the truth. When the proposal finally reached the top floor at Langley, there was silence. Then the director gave a single nod. Do it. And with that, the United States began building the largest, strangest, and most secret ship ever constructed, an engineering marvel that would sail under a false flag and a borrowed name. Its purpose: to rob the ocean itself. The operation would take years, but the decision made that day changed espionage forever. It proved that for the CIA, no frontier, land, air, or sea, was off limits. Far below, the Pacific remained still. The wreck of K-129 rested quietly in the darkness, unaware that soon the ocean around it would begin to move. And above that quiet sea, the first sketches of the Glomar Explorer took shape. A ship built not to mine minerals, but to steal secrets from the abyss. The CIA's decision was made, but the problem remained colossal. How do you lift a 2,000-ton submarine from 16,000 feet under the Pacific? It wasn't just a technical problem, it was a logistical, political, and human one. Every part of the mission had to remain invisible. Every engineer, every shipbuilder, and every crew member had to be compartmentalized, knowing only their small part of the puzzle. One slip, one rumor, and the Soviets, or worse, the world, would know what was happening. Inside the agency, the operation was called Project Azorian, a name deliberately vague to avoid raising questions in any document. The first step was simple to describe, impossible to accomplish. Design a vessel capable of lifting an entire submarine from the depths without breaking it apart. Engineers sketched and resketched plans. Hydraulic arms, reinforced cables, massive cranes, and pressure-resistant chambers were proposed, dismissed, and reimagined. The ocean's depth was relentless. At 16,000 feet, the water pressure was more than 7,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush metal like paper. Any mechanical failure could doom the mission before it began. The solution was audacious. They designed a floating fortress, a ship with a hidden internal chamber, later called a moon pool, that allowed a giant mechanical claw to lower into the abyss, latch on to the submarine, and lift it inside the vessel. Every detail mattered: the claw's hydraulics, the stability of the ship, the speed of ascent. One wrong calculation, and the sub would disintegrate, leaving behind only fragments. The CIA recruited engineers from the Navy, private industry, and aerospace, but even they didn't know the full picture. Each group worked on isolated parts. One team on the claw, another on stabilizing the hull, another on deep-sea robotics. No one had ever attempted anything like this. The public couldn't know about Azorian, and the Soviets could not suspect it. The CIA needed a cover, a story so believable it could survive scrutiny. That's when the name Howard Hughes surfaced. Hughes, reclusive billionaire, inventor, and aerospace pioneer, was the perfect front. Known for eccentric engineering projects and private ocean ventures, he could plausibly sponsor a giant mining ship. The CIA created a corporate entity, Global Marine Development, and announced plans to mine manganese nodules from the ocean floor. The story was believable. Deep-sea mining was cutting-edge, mysterious, and costly, perfect for hiding billions in secret operations. Hughes's involvement wasn't complete fiction. He lent credibility, not operational control. The public saw him as a visionary businessman, the Soviets saw him as a distraction, and the CIA controlled every move of the operation. Construction began in the early 1970s at a shipyard in California. The Glomar Explorer would become the largest and most sophisticated vessel ever built for a covert operation. At 600 feet long, with a moon pool capable of lowering the mechanical claw, it was unlike anything in the world. The hull was reinforced with titanium in critical areas. The engines were upgraded for silent operation, and the ship carried laboratories, workshops, and living quarters for over 100 crew members. The claw, nicknamed Clementine, was the heart of the mission. Over 50 feet long, hydraulically operated and reinforced with steel, it was designed to grab the submarine gently enough to prevent it from breaking, but strong enough to lift a 2,000-ton vessel from crushing depths. Engineers spent months running simulations. Each failure required redesigning components, recalibrating hydraulics, and testing underwater pressure chambers. They had to account for currents, ocean turbulence, and even the possibility of nearby Soviet submarines detecting vibrations. Secrecy dominated every decision. Crew members were told they were building a mining vessel. Engineers were told they were designing deep-sea research equipment. Only a few dozen top CIA operatives knew the full objective. Communication was tightly monitored. Even a casual question from a journalist could compromise the mission. diplomacy was also a concern. The ship would sail into international waters. If the Soviets discovered what was happening, it could trigger an international crisis. Therefore, the operation relied on plausible deniability at every level. Every document was classified, every cover story rehearsed, every public interaction scripted. Even the Navy remained partially in the dark. Certain details were shared only under strict compartmentalization. It was one of the largest covert projects ever undertaken, involving engineers, naval officers, and CIA operatives, all working in isolated pockets of knowledge. The crew of the Glomar Explorer was unaware of the full mission. Many believed they were part of a deep-sea mining expedition or oceanographic survey. This was intentional. If anyone leaked the true objective, the mission would be compromised. Despite this, the psychological pressure was immense. Hundreds of men worked long hours in silence, aware that one mistake could sink a multi-billion-dollar operation. Or worse, expose the United States' most audacious secret. Top engineers and CIA planners lived with constant stress. They knew that if the Soviets discovered the plan, it could spark a Cold War crisis. If the claw failed, the submarine would be lost forever. Every day was a balance between genius and disaster. By 1973, the Glomar Explorer was nearly complete. Dry runs tested the claw's hydraulics and lifting capacity. Engineers monitored pressure tolerances, stability in heavy seas, and the structural integrity of every component. The final step was perhaps the most audacious: sail to the site of K-129, lift the submarine, and keep it secret from the world and the Soviets. No one had ever attempted anything like it. The CIA coded the operation as Project Azorian, briefed only a handful of top officials, and prepared to send the Glomar Explorer across thousands of miles of open ocean. The mission would test the limits of engineering, espionage, and human endurance. The oceans watched silently, as if aware of what was coming. In a quiet room at Langley, a top officer summed up the stakes. If we fail, the submarine stays at the bottom. If we succeed, we may change the rules of intelligence forever. The Glomar Explorer sliced through the Pacific waves, outward bound to a point 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii. To anyone observing from the surface, it appeared to be a colossal mining vessel, its deck crowded with cranes, scaffolding, and equipment. Its hull gleamed under the sun, a floating fortress of industry. But inside, the truth was far more extraordinary. Beneath its unassuming exterior lay a massive moon pool and the heart of the mission. Clementine, a mechanical claw designed to reach 16,000 feet below the surface, grasped the Soviet submarine, K-129, and bring it to the ship without tearing it apart. Every officer, engineer, and sailor on board knew their role, but few knew the stakes. What they were about to attempt had never been done before. The ocean below, cold and dark, would test their skill, patience, and nerve in ways no simulation could prepare them for. As the Glomar Explorer neared the coordinates identified by US hydrophones, tension built aboard the ship. The ocean seemed endless, indifferent, and silent. Above the waves, birds circled lazily. Below, currents whispered along the abyssal plain, hiding the enormous wreck. Specialized sonar arrays were deployed to scan the seafloor. The wreck of K-129 emerged on monitors, a twisted shadow of steel, partially buried in sediment, lying exactly where the CIA had predicted. Every detail had to be precise. A single miscalculation could collapse the mission. Navigating a ship over an object 16,000 feet below the surface was an exercise in patience. Even a minor drift could misalign the claw, leading to catastrophic failure. Operators worked in shifts, staring at sonar screens, hand hovering over controls, listening to the faint hum of machinery. The stakes could not have been higher. Any Soviet reconnaissance, satellite or submarine, could detect the operation, and any leak would compromise decades of secrecy. When the time came, Clementine was slowly lowered into the abyss. Hydraulic pumps hissed and clanged as the enormous claw descended into the black water. Pressure at this depth was more than 7,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush ordinary steel. The claw had to withstand this while gripping a submarine intact. Hours passed as it descended. The ship above remained still, every movement deliberate. On the control deck, operators watched dozens of gauges and monitors. Engineers monitored the tension in cables, water currents, and the behavior of the claw. A single misalignment could snap the cable or crush the sub. As the claw approached the wreck, the tension in the room was palpable. Every operator knew that decades of planning and billions of dollars were about to be tested in a single mechanical act. Finally, Clementine reached the submarine. Monitors showed the claw's claws closing around the hull. Silence filled the control room. Then, slowly, the claw began lifting. The first few feet were critical. Sediment from the seafloor clung to the wreck, creating drag. Engineers had anticipated this, but nothing could perfectly mimic the complexity of lifting a fragile submarine from crushing depths. Suddenly, alarms sounded. One of the hydraulic arms was under more strain than expected. The claw shuddered. Operators adjusted the lift, balancing pressure, tension, and force. The crew held their collective breath. For moments, the entire mission seemed on the brink of failure. But the claw stabilized, and the submarine began its slow ascent toward the surface. Then, at roughly halfway up, disaster struck. The sub, already weakened by decades under the sea, began to fracture. Structural failure rippled through the hull. A section broke off, sinking again into the depths. Lost forever, the room went silent. Engineers and CIA operatives realized that despite their planning, nature had claimed half the prize. Years of work had resulted in only partial recovery. Yet, despite the setback, the claw continued its ascent with the section it had managed to grasp. Slowly, agonizingly, the submarine was brought into the Glomar Explorer's moon pool. What emerged from the depths was a mix of success and heartbreak. Key sections of the submarine, including missile compartments and communication devices, were recovered. Documents, cryptographic materials, and parts of the vessel offered intelligence that the CIA could analyze immediately. Perhaps most haunting were the human remains. The crew of K-129, lost in the cold darkness, were partially recovered. A small, discreet ceremony was held aboard the ship, a burial at sea, honoring the fallen in silence. The Soviets would never know the full truth, and the United States would never publicly acknowledge it. Despite losing half the sub, the intelligence gained was unprecedented. Cryptographic devices and missile data provided insight into Soviet technology, communication methods, and naval strategy. It was a partial victory, but in the world of espionage, even partial victories were priceless. The crew of the Glomar Explorer, despite being shielded from the full mission, endured immense stress. Operating heavy machinery over open water is dangerous under the best circumstances. Doing so with billions of dollars at stake and the potential for international incident made every shift tense. Engineers worked in exhausting rotations, monitoring the claw, recalibrating systems, and anticipating failures. Every cable, every joint, every hydraulic pump was under scrutiny. One human error could destroy the submarine, or worse, compromise the entire operation. By the time the recovery was complete, the Glomar Explorer had proven that man could reach the deepest corners of the ocean with precision. Even if nature would not yield entirely, the operation concluded without incident from the Soviets. The location of the Glomar Explorer was kept secret. The mission was never publicly acknowledged. To the outside world, it remained a mining expedition, a quirky project funded by a billionaire. In reality, the CIA had pulled off a near-impossible heist, raising a portion of a Soviet nuclear submarine from the abyss. Along with intelligence that could shift the balance of power, the operation had demonstrated the limits and potential of Cold War espionage. For those who had worked on Azorian, the mission was unforgettable. They had navigated pressures, literal and figurative, that no engineer had faced before. They had overcome the ocean's indifference, secrecy's constraints, and the ever-present threat of Soviet detection. Yet, the operation was also a reminder of the sea's ultimate authority. Half of K-129 remained lost, lying silently in the Pacific, holding secrets that the world would never see. The abyss had taken its due, even as the CIA had claimed a victory. Project Azorian had proved that human ambition could challenge nature itself, but also that some mysteries would remain buried forever. The Glomar Explorer returned to port, its decks heavy with the spoils of a mission that would remain secret for decades. To the outside world, the ship had completed another deep-sea mining survey. Inside, however, the CIA celebrated one of the most audacious espionage operations in history. The recovery had been partial, but the intelligence gained was invaluable. Cryptographic devices, missile components, and sensitive Soviet documents provided insight into Moscow's naval capabilities. Analysts pored over the material in secure rooms, translating, decrypting, and comparing it to what was already known. Every detail was another piece of a puzzle that could shift the balance of power in the Cold War. Yet, with success came a new challenge: secrecy. The operation had involved thousands of people, billions of dollars, and a vessel impossible to explain without revealing the true purpose. Maintaining the illusion of a mining expedition was paramount. Inevitably, journalists began to notice the Glomar Explorer. Its size alone was remarkable, dwarfing every ship in the harbor. Its unusual deck configuration and heavy cranes sparked speculation. Local newspapers ran stories about mysterious ocean mining operations funded by Howard Hughes. Some reporters started asking questions. Was the ship really mining manganese nodules? Why were the operations conducted in such remote areas? Had Hughes discovered a new mineral resource? The CIA realized that any misstep could expose Project Azorian. They needed a strategy that would neither confirm nor deny the mission, because the truth was too sensitive to acknowledge, and any lie could be dangerous. To handle the press inquiries, the CIA coined a phrase that would become legendary in intelligence circles: "We can neither confirm nor deny." It was simple, unassailable, and perfectly suited to the operation. When journalists asked if the agency had recovered a Soviet submarine, officials repeated the line: "No confirmation, no denial." The phrase became a standard in intelligence operations, a shield that could protect covert activities while remaining legally defensible. The Glomar response, as it would later be called, exemplified the delicate balance between secrecy and accountability in espionage. Even decades later, the phrase remains a hallmark of how intelligence agencies respond to sensitive inquiries. But at the time, it was a tool of survival, for the mission, for the people involved, and for international diplomacy. Despite losing half of the submarine to the abyss, the recovered sections provided a wealth of information. Analysts gained access to missile components, navigational charts, and cryptographic systems that revealed how the Soviets tracked American submarines. This knowledge was immediately applied to improve U.S. naval operations. Submarine routes were adjusted, communication security protocols updated, and counterintelligence operations refined. The intelligence had a ripple effect across the Cold War theater, influencing decisions from naval deployments to nuclear strategy. The human remains recovered from the wreck were treated with utmost respect. They were buried at sea, a quiet acknowledgement of the lives lost, and a reminder that espionage often comes at a profound human cost. Project Azorian was not without controversy. The operation had cost billions of dollars, required unprecedented engineering feats, and risked international incident. Some within the agency questioned whether the potential intelligence gains justified the risks. Yet from the perspective of those who orchestrated the heist, the mission was a triumph of ingenuity, patience, and audacity. It demonstrated that with enough resources, secrecy, and determination, humans could reach even the most inaccessible corners of the world. The Soviets, unaware of the heist, continued to believe K-129 had been lost in a tragic accident. The ocean had swallowed most of it, but the CIA had claimed a fraction that was enough to alter the course of intelligence gathering. Project Azorian left a profound legacy in the field of espionage and deep-sea engineering. The mission proved that intelligence agencies could undertake operations that were once considered impossible. It combined cutting-edge technology, human ingenuity, and psychological strategy, setting a precedent for future covert operations. The Glomar Explorer itself continued to operate under the guise of mining research, a floating monument to one of the boldest missions in CIA history. Its story became emblematic of Cold War daring, a reminder that intelligence work often unfolds in silence, in the shadows, and far from public recognition. Even decades later, declassified fragments of the mission allow historians and analysts to reconstruct the operation, but many details remain hidden. The ocean keeps its secrets well, and some of K-129 will likely remain in the abyss forever. Project Azorian demonstrates a fundamental truth about espionage, that intelligence is as much about patience, planning, and deception as it is about daring action. The mission was not a Hollywood spectacle. It was calculated, precise, and, above all, dangerous. The engineers, CIA operatives, and crew faced physical, psychological, and ethical challenges. They had to balance the desire for knowledge with the risk of international conflict. Every decision carried consequences that extended far beyond the deck of the Glomar Explorer. In the end, the mission succeeded where failure could have been catastrophic. It recovered valuable intelligence, protected operational secrecy, and pioneered techniques that continue to influence deep-sea operations and covert missions today. The partial recovery of K-129 also serves as a cautionary tale. Even with vast resources and careful planning, nature remained a formidable adversary. The ocean claimed much of the submarine, reminding operatives that no matter how advanced technology becomes, some mysteries remain beyond human control. Yet for the CIA, the operation was worth the risk. It redefined what was possible in intelligence gathering and demonstrated the lengths to which agencies would go to secure strategic advantage. It also highlighted the enduring importance of secrecy, innovation, and psychological strategy in espionage. The world would never know the full story. The ocean kept its secrets, but for those in the shadows, the success of Project Azorian marked a milestone in Cold War history, a daring operation that pushed the boundaries of human ingenuity, courage, and deception. If you thought Project Azorian was audacious, wait until you hear how the CIA extended its reach beyond the oceans, into space. Subscribe now, because the next mission goes higher, further, and even deeper into the shadows than anything you've seen before.